3 months is a long time if you don't like it where you are.
Now, you may remember the old titles, True Crime Fight for New York and True Crime Fight for LA. And those titles, one was okay and one wasn't so great. And so when the company that made those games left Activision, Activision kept the name. So that company wants to make, they go, oh, well, we want to make a similar game, set in Hong Kong, about the triads, but we can't call it True Crime. So what do? We call it Sleeping Dogs. And so that game is effectively the spiritual successor to that series. And while that series has a bit of a checkered past, this game is actually a little bit of an unpolished gem underneath it all. I guess we'll go into the presentation first. Graphically, the game isn't great. The facial animations, I guess the facial textures, everything doesn't look that great. When it's in motion, it looks all right, but up close during the cutscenes, not so good. I mean, when you go into the actual, the landscape and the way it actually looks like Hong Kong, it really looks and feels, it's got, all the streets are lined exactly as you expect. It has that real, feel about it, like the old British colony that it was. And while it's definitely, I guess, indicative of where it's supposed to be, it still doesn't look great. The sound makes up for it a little bit. The voice acting is really, really odd in that, I don't know, some of them do a very good job of being Americans and some of them do a very bad job of being Asian people speaking English. They said, okay, so we want you to do an English voice, but then turn up the Asian accent. It's just a little bit over the top, but I guess you can't have a full game in Cantonese. That said, I would play that game, and I think that was one of the big advantages of Stranglehold, but that's a discussion for another day. That said, the car noises, gun noises, the fighting, particularly the soundtrack in the cars. Oh, it's one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard. There's all these great songs. There's a little bit of Chinese hip hop. It's still better than skip hop, but everything else is fantastic. So presentation, I'm gonna have to give a 7. Graphics bringing it down a little bit. Now gameplay, and this is where it differentiates itself very heavily from the last two. There was some issues with running over people very easily, committing crimes very easily, and then it just turning into them coming straight after you. You play an undercover cop, so the idea is you've obviously got to stay on the right side of the law. It's not as easy to hurt people hurt innocent civilians in this, which makes it a better game. It's easy to flow down the roads. The way that the fighting system tears up, the way that a lot of the skills level up, you've got different meters for different skills. The way everything kind of works because it steals from everything and makes it good. So it does a bit of a Darksiders on this one. So while it's not necessarily the most original or the most well-presented game, it still plays very, very well. So I'm going to give the gameplay on this one a 7 out of 10. We go now into the conclusion, and yes, I'm going to keep it with that good old number, a 7. It's a very good game, it's just not a great game. With all of the technical faults and everything that pulls it down, it just doesn't hit the height it's good to reach. That said, it is so much fun. It's great fun just blowing around the city, starting a fight, doing these missions. Surveillance missions are great. Everything about it just works. But it's all these pieces put together into this big jambalaya.